can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100,000.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders like the founders of P90X, Atari, many more, how they overcome big challenges in life and business. This is part of the Prosper Show e-commerce mastery series, where top sellers and experts teach you what really works to boost your e-commerce business. They have an amazing conference with some of the top Amazon sellers and industry leaders like we have with Mark today. Our sponsor today is Rise25.com, where entrepreneurs of 6, 7, and 8-figure businesses come together live and in person every few months to solve their biggest business challenges and leave with lifelong friendships. Check out Rise25.com. It's run by myself and co-founder John Corcoran. It's application only. Today, I'm very excited. We have Mark Daoust. He's founder of Quiet Light Brokerage. He founded it back in 2007, and they help entrepreneurs with an online business sell their website for maximum value, which I'm sure every entrepreneur wants in the end. And he started Quiet Light after selling an online publication they built to over 220,000 subscribers. Mark, I was watching a video today of you, I think it was in, 2006 or 2005, giving an industry leader conference. You're speaking. Wow. And since, you've helped thousands of entrepreneurs sell their business. And the most impressive stat about Mark is he has 6 kids. That is crazy, Mark. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. And I would just say that anyone who has 2 kids is crazy. 6 is easier, in my opinion.
Yeah, my wife would say 3, but yeah, that is wild. I don't know how you do it all. I'm looking forward to digging deep into valuation, selling the business. So I thought we'd go back to when you sold yours. Go back to that point, and what were some of the things that went well? What were some of the mistakes? Looking back, you're like, was a head slap for you?
Well, so, all right, my story when I sold my business.
This was Site Reference.
Yeah, right? It was Site Reference, and that was back in 2005. And it was actually Site Reference and Tower Search combined. There were 2 sites combined. Okay. Tower Search was a something like a pay-per-click search engine for anyone who's been online long enough to know that there were other options besides Google AdWords and Bing and things like that. There used to be a bunch of these smaller pay-per-click search engines. And so I sold the 2 together. And when I sold it originally, I tell this story often at conferences, but I had started the business and I got bored of it relatively quickly because I'm an entrepreneur, shiny penny syndrome, something else, let's do something different. And I went to go sell it. And the person who I talked to recommended that I wait for a year. And it was great advice, absolutely phenomenal advice.
Why did they recommend that?
Because it was too young, and I had just started to really realize revenue from it. So he saw that, and he recommended that I just wait 12 months, which I did. And the benefit was I went from a valuation of maybe $35,000 to his valuation, which was completely unrealistic. And this is going to be the area where things might have gone better. But the business sold in the end for between $100,000 and $200,000. We'll just leave it at that, which is a huge difference over the course of a year. I mean, from $20,000-$30,000 to low 6 figures. That's a huge difference for a 1-year wait. Now, what could have been done better, and I know this for a fact because I know that the person who bought it from me was offered some money for the business just a little bit after he acquired it. I should have focused on a few of the things that really help make businesses valuable. The biggest problem I had with Site Reference was that I did all the work. I sold the ads. I wrote most of the articles. I was the editor. I was the programmer. I was the designer. I did everything top to bottom. And so I was trying to sell me. And if I had outsourced some of that, I could have probably gotten about triple what I got for the business.
Yeah. Really interesting. In that respect, why was it? I would expect something with 220,000 subscribers to be valued more.
Well, it probably should have been. I probably could have done more with it. But also keep in mind, 200 list size can be deceiving. So this was back in 2003 when I really worked on it and built it up. And a lot of those subscribers were not responsive. We had a very low open rate. Our open rate was 7 or 8% for every email that went out. And so the list number was impressive and kind of eye-popping, but then when you took a look at the stats, then you saw where how active it really was. So the way Tower Search worked with site references, it was a single opt-in sort of service. You could opt into Tower Search, get all sorts of free comps and free services with Tower Search, but part of that was that you were a part of the subscription as well, which is a recipe for low open rates.
Yeah. So part of you, if you were to go back, you would have systemized some of those positions that you were doing so that when you sell the business, those employees or staff go with it and it's a more sellable asset. What else would you have done differently to increase the value at that time?
Well, I mean, that would have easily been the number one thing that would have
tripled the
value.
Yeah,
that would have tripled the value. Other than that, it really would have been finding ways to add revenue to the site. So I think SitePoint really followed the model that I should have followed. And SitePoint at that time was in its infancy. They were bigger than us, but they were in their infancy. They went to selling their own guides and their own ebooks and bringing in outside writers and building some value again outside of just advertising. So having some sort of paid content would have made a lot of sense for that business.
So after you sold, your friend approached you and wanted you to help him sell his. How did that go?
Right. So my start in the internet, I started in 1998. I think that was the first time I designed a website. And it was horrible, but that was in 1998. And then in college, I got a job with a company called Alabanza Corporation. And lots of lessons working for them because I went through the dot-com bust with Alabanza. We went from a sales staff. I was part of the sales staff on that with Alabanza Corporation. We went from a sales staff of about 30. And then one day, everyone was being called into an office and we went from 30 down to 4.
Wow.
I went from having 3 accounts to over 200 in one day.
Good luck, Mark. Here you go.
Right. Well, and then the best part is I had to tell all of those clients that we were doubling the price for their services. So
wow,
it was an absolute nightmare. Well, one of my clients became a good friend. I actually stood up in his wedding, and he paid for my honeymoon, and we've been friends. We still talk to this day. He saw that I sold my business, and I was taking a year off. And he had kicked around selling his company for a while, and finally asked if I would help him. And I said, sure, let's give it a go. Really had no business selling his business. I thought it would be easy, and it was hard. But I had so many good lessons from that. I had so many good lessons from that. I had sold my business the year before for 6 figures. I thought I was just going to be able to turn around, start up a new business. And
was yours hard to sell? I mean, did
Mine?
you do it by yourself or did you hire someone at the time?
I hired someone for myself.
You hired someone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
And it took a long time.
Yeah,
it took a very long time. It took them 8.5 months, and I'd actually fired them. I told them that I wasn't going to sell it anymore because it was on the market for 6+ months, and then they called me back. They called me back. Somebody I had looked at it before and wanted to make an offer, so I listened, and they made an offer, and then about 30 days later, that closed.
So with your friend, you're like, I could easily do it in sooner than 8 months.
that was the hope. And so, when I looked at the people who had helped me, I realized that they didn't have a lot of background in the internet. They knew some M&A stuff pretty well, and they had contracts and new process, but they didn't have the same, even though they
the industry knowledge was completely different, is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. They didn't, I mean, they had some knowledge. I'm not going to badmouth them here and say that they didn't know anything they were doing, but they didn't have the same base of information that somebody who had built a business online knew. And so I figured that would be an advantage. And I think it has been an advantage, and is still, I mean, to this day, it's still kind of our pitch to people is that anyone that works with us, they've bought, they've sold, and they've started a significant internet enterprise, right. All 3 of those criteria.
What was the hard part? So you went to sell your friends, and what were some of the lessons and hard parts about that?
Oh, boy, that was a while ago. Knowing the process, knowing what
you always remember your first, though, right?
Then
you always remember your first.
I remember the first because I got paid the day I went broke. So that was good. I think the really hard part was being shown repeatedly over and over again that I didn't know what I was doing. I would get called by somebody. I remember I got called by another broker, and this was a web hosting company, and this guy specialized in web hosting. He knew web hosting, And he called me and he said, "You're crazy with that price." I'm like, "Well, no, I don't think I am." And he said, "No, I'm in web hosting. I know this price is absolutely ridiculous." And turns out he was right and wrong at the same time. He was right that the multiples that I was asking were way too
You were
high.
asking too much or multiple. Okay.
Way too much for that industry, because it's not an industry that most of the acquisitions within web hosting happen within the web hosting industry, and they actually have lower multiples. At least they did at the time. But we ended up getting very close to the price that we were asking.
Really?
So we got kind of the crazy price.
So it's good that you didn't know as much.
The ignorance there helped. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you decide what to charge for that, for helping someone?
I just went with what I paid when I sold my business.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Is there an industry standard that people should be looking at?
There is. 10% tends to be the industry standard. Some brokerages for smaller deals, so sub $100,000 deals, will charge 15 or 20%. We have a minimum at Quiet Light Brokerage for ours, and that has actually increased over the years. Right now it's at 15,000.
It's a lot of work, to do that.
Well, and there's a practical reason there too. If you have a site that's $50,000 and you're charging just 10%, and let's say I'm representing you, so I'm representing you with a potential $5,000 commission, and then I'm representing a $2.5 million listing.
Which you're going to spend more time and energy on.
Right. I feel like I'm an honest person. I feel like I'm going to try and give people the right, same attention, but reality sets in pretty quickly that you're going to spend time on the big money one. So the minimum is there to help protect against that. I mean, 15,000 is a lot of money, and we completely get it as well. If we're dealing with somebody where their valuation is 70, 80,000, we just explain to them, look, it probably doesn't make sense. We get it. That's fine. But we've had people list with us even with that minimum commission. So,
So what did you do in that year that you took off?
Oh,
you were trying to figure out what the next thing was?
Yeah. So I had, what was I doing? I had a business I was starting. It was a forum and article-based site. I had two things. I had a forum and an article-based site that was for people that were dealing with lots of debt issues. I still actually really like the model here. I used AdSense and was rotating in people's AdSense IDs. And the idea was, if you're in debt, let's all work together and create help resources. And if you create help resources in this discussion format, I'm going to start rotating in your AdSense ID, and you're going to be able to earn some money.
It's like a pooled way. Yeah,
exactly. So that was kind of the idea, but the ramp up period was just too long for that. And then I had a review site for affiliates and affiliate products, and it was going to really key in on the JV market. It was back when joint ventures and these one-time mailings and one-time products were really popular. And I mean, there's still a market for them now, but not like it was back in 2006.
Right.
So
you decided to start Quiet Light Brokerage after you helped your friend. So then how did you go out and get new business? I mean, because it's like a two-part marketplace, right? You need buyers and you need sellers.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the buyers are easy. Buyers are always easy. And I had somebody who was assisting me at the time. He definitely shouldn't have been helping me at the time because there was a conflict of interest there. But I had somebody helping me at the time, and he had told me, he said, buyers are easy. Don't worry about the buyers, which is true because buyers are actively looking. Deal flow is hard to find. And not that you shouldn't cultivate those relationships, you should. And we do, but that's the easier side. The harder side was getting people to initially sign up, and you're very hungry at that point for any listings. So we would co-broker, ask other people if we could list their listings with us. And then I ran an ad in WebPro News. I bought a dedicated mailing. I think it was like $5,000 for it. And it was just a solo email that went out and said, "How much is your website worth? Contact us. We'll tell you how much it's worth." Yeah. And we were able to pick up a handful of clients from that. But you always have the tough question. They would ask, "What experience do you have?" And you have the choice to make. Are you going to be honest, or are you going to try and BS them through? And I would just tell them, I'd say, "I just sold my business. I'm starting. I'm new. So I don't have a ton of experience, but we'll go through this together." Right. And some people said no. That was fine.
Yeah. So I want to hear a horror story and also a really positive story as far as the business acquisition.
Okay, so a horror story. I have a few of those. I mean, anytime you do a number of deals, you're going to run into those. Let me pick a good one for you.
Yeah.
One that springs to mind. Oh boy, I'm trying to choose between two big ones.
You can go with both.
We'll start with
because I think there's lessons to be learned in each of them. I'm assuming so.
Well, I mean, they're actually kind of similar. Both were just complete fraudsters. I mean, that's the biggest danger here, right? Is fraud. So we had a deal that was done, completely done, money exchanged, and we found out after the fact that the seller wasn't just lying; they were forging documents and had lied about, or had completely failed to disclose that they had contractors. That was through a different bank account. They never disclosed any of this information. They had met with the buyer in person and just lied directly to them. We found out later that there was actually cases against this person for fraud, and so we worked with the Attorney General to help in that. But the problem there was we had a client who got taken, and we were square in the middle of that. And I mean, you don't feel good about that. And we ended up working with that client. There were some valuable assets that they did acquire. It wasn't a complete fraud business. It was just highly overinflated. Yeah. So we ended up working with them, and we ended up finding somebody to acquire it for them to help them recoup some of their costs at no cost, of course, on our side. We just worked with them for free on that. And they recovered most of their money, or a good portion of their money, from that. So that was a horror story.
Did they actually forge like tax documents, or what type of things were they forging?
I'm trying to remember exactly what they forged. I want to say that they actually did forge the tax documents and the bank returns. And we've seen that a few times. We worked with another company where they outright forged PayPal statements. And we caught it before the deal closed. This was going to be a $4 million deal.
Wow.
So it would have been a big deal. And our broker, my broker at the time, Amanda, called me one night. We were a couple weeks away from closing. And she said, Mark, this doesn't look right. She's like, there's just something I can't place about this, but something isn't right about this. And I don't think that the buyer's catching on. And so we talked about it a little bit, and then she kept poking around, and she called PayPal and said, can I just verify some of these transaction IDs with you? I want to see if these are real transaction IDs. And they were cooperative. Imagine that, PayPal being cooperative, if anything. And
yeah, I've heard some horror stories on that end too. Yeah,
right. And we found out that it was completely forged documents. So
they just photoshopped it or something.
They photoshopped it. Yeah. What you can do. I mean, PayPal statements are usually web-based, so you can easily just change the source code and make it look completely legit. So then we started looking into the customer names, calling these companies and asking for the people that were listed as the customer names, and none of them worked there. So it was a complete forgery top to bottom.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you have to do in that case? Do you have to report this person? I mean, is there any other action, or is it just like...
Yeah, they were reported appropriately. We actually send out something to all the other brokerage firms in the industry to let them know that what our experience was, and to not work with them. So yeah, it's rare. We have not dealt with a lot of fraud, thankfully. Yeah. And I think over the years we've done a good job of filtering that out. People understand that it's really hard to get fraud bias these days. Yeah. It's a lot easier to go with a startup than with somebody who's been around as long as we have. But if that ever happens, then we work with the Attorney General as needed if that's the right avenue to go.
So what are some of the checks in place that people should look at, or that you look at? I mean, is it, okay, you could pull random PayPal IDs, or what are some other things that people should look at, or that you look at as maybe a big red flag for someone?
Well, I'll tell you what our process is and what helps us filter out a lot. It's going to be different from what a buyer is going to deal with, though. So a buyer is going to want to take a different tack than us. For us, frankly, we just make our sellers go through a lot of work. They have to produce a lot of documentation for us and answer a lot of questions. It's very, very typical for somebody to do 2 calls with us that are 45 minutes to an hour answering questions. And then we have them do a written interview, which can be on the short end, 65 questions, on the long end, 100 plus questions. And these aren't just standard interviews. We custom write all of these for every single client. We actually have a policy against banking our own questions. We don't want to get lazy with that. We want to be thinking deeply about these. Okay, so what this does is, for anyone that is trying to do some sort of forgery or get something passed, it's a lot of work, especially when you can go to another broker who isn't going to do all that. It's a lot of work to do that through us. And so what we've found since we've really started adopting this is we see very
people out.
It weeds people out naturally. It also gives us a chance to have just a basic sniff test, right? I mean, if somebody is sending us documents with financials that are thin or a mess or just obviously inaccurate, we've seen enough where we can weed those people out pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. From a buyer standpoint, I think the biggest thing that a buyer needs to do, ask questions, ask a lot of questions, background checks. I encourage a buyer and a seller to run background checks on each other. We've had horror stories on the buy side with there's some buyers out there who are just mentally ill, and I'm not saying that in a disparaging way towards them. They are actually mentally ill and have some issues. We've run into a few of those people, and any broker in the industry knows. We all know the same people that fall into that category. So running background checks is a great idea. With tax returns, get a 4506T form, which verifies that the tax return is accurate. With bank statements, do what you can to confirm with the bank if possible about the balances so that those aren't being forged. All those things are just smart things to do, and will help. Will help.
What have you found, Mark, are some key questions that are important that the seller answers? I mean, besides the obvious ones, right? I mean, the ones that maybe other people wouldn't even think of. They're on your questionnaire, and you're like, it really points to whether they're, to their business or something that's working or not working in their business.
I mean, it depends so much on the business itself. So if somebody has
e-commerce, let's say, I don't know if that's too broad. Also,
well, let me give you one for one that I recently sold. We actually just closed this a few days ago, and the business was on a sharp decline. And so naturally with that, you look at why, and you start by asking why. That's the obvious question, right? Well, why is the decline? But then not stopping there. The answer, and this is almost always the answer, well, I'm not spending as much time on it. Okay, well, now that branches into probably 5 different questions. Well, why aren't you spending as much time on it? If you can recover this, why aren't you recovering this? Are there any other issues that we should be looking at here? And with this one, sure, there were some other issues that, competitiveness with the product and competitors starting to eat away at various places. One of the products started having higher levels of returns than other products. So there's a lot of reasons that went into that. And what I'm looking for more than the explanation, I'm looking for the understanding on the part of the owner and the level of detail. Does he have a good handle on what he's talking about? If somebody's just glossing over something, you're going to get glossed over answers. Well, I'm not working on it that much. We just aren't working the business as much. It's got lots of potential. You just need to be doing X, Y, and Z. Okay, maybe not. Let's start to get a little bit deeper in here, because usually it's not just one.
Then it's why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z if you know that's the problem?
And it's a common question, and there's no single wrong answer. I mean, people will not grow their business. People will not do the obvious things all the time. I talked to a buyer who bought something from me back in October. I was just talking to him on Monday, and he was mentioning something that he used to grow the business. And he was wondering, he said, do you have other businesses that have the same deficit? He found a deficit in this company that he was able to exploit to grow it.
What do you mean by deficit?
Something that could be improved, a growth.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay. So
I don't want to get into his strategy.
For sure.
But he said, are there other companies like this? And I said, absolutely. People, when you own a business, it's easy to not improve some of the obvious things because you just get comfortable with it. You get comfortable with what you're doing, and as long as the money's rolling in the same way it has been, a lot of people are comfortable with that. I know I do the same with Quiet Light. So, yeah.
What are some general things people do? Because that's obviously from a buyer's perspective, you're looking at the big potential, right? Because you're buying it on a multiple, you want to improve it. What are some things that you've seen the buyers do out of the gate that's really improved the value of their purchase?
Sure. I think there's a number of things you can do. What I recommend to people is to have something where you can have a strong suit. And it can either be SEO, paid marketing, conversion rate optimization. Other things that I've seen people do is if you have logistics in place, like a warehouse, there's a great opportunity there. If you're doing traditional e-commerce where you're doing some of your own fulfillment, assuming you're not using Amazon FBA, if you have a really nice ERP backend software to manage your inventory and order processes, then you get some overlap there where you can bring those advantages to a new business. So the most, it varies from person to person, from buyer to buyer. But I've seen all of those strategies played before. The conversion rate optimization would be a great example. You have a low conversion rate. You're good at running tests. You know how to run tests efficiently, and you can grow something from a 0.5% conversion rate to a 1.5 conversion rate. That's a huge amount of growth. Funnel marketing would be another thing. Taking a site that doesn't have any funnels, if you know funnel marketing well, you can build in funnel marketing into that and grow a business that way as well. So it depends on the strengths of the person.
Yeah. Have you found anything in particular, like a trend specifically in e-commerce that's working really well out of those, SEO, conversion rate or whatever, or funnel? What are people doing now that is, across the board? Is there anything that they're doing really well now in e-commerce specifically?
In e-commerce specifically, I think it falls more into people that are good with vendor relationships or might have vendor relationships. People that are good with being able to manage inventory and those processes, or people who are very good on Amazon and know the Amazon environment and ecosystem well. It tends to be more e-commerce tends to be more of a people who have a better familiarity with traditional business tend to do well with e-commerce and usually cause those businesses to grow pretty rapidly.
Any red flags like buyers should look at when purchasing an e-commerce business specifically?
Lots of red flags, but it would depend on the business itself. I think let's get into some of the red flags. Some of the things that I would watch out for with an e-commerce business would be the uniqueness of the product. I'm not a fan of dropship companies for the most part. There are some that can be run well and have some good advantages, but you want to have some defensibility. I think with e-commerce, the biggest problem is it's just
can someone knock you off?
Yeah, it's so easy to have your market flooded. So that would be that would be probably the biggest red flag I would be looking for is what's the defensibility of the product. Anyone who has their own brand, that's a good thing. We like to see that.
What's been the trend of? I mean, you see a lot of businesses come through your desk, and what's been the trend with people starting or selling e-commerce businesses specifically? Has it been the same? Has it been increased lately?
We're seeing an uptick in it right now. Definitely with Amazon as well, we're seeing an uptick. I wrote an article on this a while ago, just trying to speculate why are we seeing so many Amazon businesses hit the marketplace. And it's not just quite like brokerage, it's all the brokerages out there. Everyone's seen this uptick in Amazon businesses. And I think part of it's just the growth of that marketplace has been so phenomenal that we're now naturally at that 2, 3, 4 year window when people had started their businesses 2, 3, 4 years ago. It's a popular time to look at selling a business. Starting and selling, we are seeing that. I still hesitate to say that most of our clients started their business with the intent to sell. I think most started it with the intent to just grow it and hockey stick it. But, again, shiny penny syndrome. We all get it. And about 2 to 3 years, most entrepreneurs get bored and want to do something else.
So you're finding kind of the life cycle of it is they've had the business for 2 or 3 years?
Yeah. 2 to 3 years is probably the beginning part. So if you look at like a bell curve, you'll probably see the heart of it being the beginning of the bell curve being around 2 to 3 years, and then 7, 8 years on the other part of the heart of the bell, and then after that it tails off.
Have you given that advice to the same advice you got when you were going to sell your site? Is just to wait? Have you told people just wait?
We tell the majority of people that we talk.
Really?
To wait. Yeah, the vast majority of people that come into evaluation get homework from us before they sell. No, not everyone takes it. Some people want to sell now. The person that we just closed, that I just closed a business for this past week, I told him to go away and to work on his business, and want to,
Go
which is
away.
fine.
Yeah.
I don't go away. My broker Joe tells a story, and he tells it so flattering, right? And I'll tell you how he tells it, and I'll tell you the truth behind the story.
Okay.
He came to me to sell his business, Pure Stat, years ago, and I remember looking at this thing, thinking it was an absolute mess at the time, and that he wasn't going to get a ton of value out of it. So I told him that. I said, "You're not going to get a ton of value. You should go out. You should fix it, and then come back to me at that point." And he tells a story like, Mark wasn't pushy. He didn't, he cared more about my business than anything else, and he didn't even bother to follow up with me 6 months down the road. The truth is, I was kind of lazy. I mean, that's really what was happening there. But it worked out. I mean, he ended up getting a lot more value out of his business because of that. So we tell a lot of people that.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, if you look back at yours, if someone would have told you to systemize it or whatever the case is, you could have tripled the value. What's some of the common homework you give people?
Oftentimes it's grow the revenue and the earnings again. People come to us after things start to go bad, or after they start to get burned out and are focusing on another project. And once they start focusing on the other project, sales start to go down.
Yeah.
I've been working. So I followed up with a guy 2 days ago who I first talked to 9 years ago, when he was going to buy the business that he now owns. And then he contacted me a year and a half ago about potentially selling. I did a valuation for him, and I said, here's where your value is now. If you were to do X, Y, and Z, we could get your valuation up to this. I would recommend waiting and holding. We were going to list it this quarter, and he just got back to me and said, hey, business is going great. I'm just going to kind of ride this out. My response was, absolutely. If your business is growing, if your revenue is going up, your earnings are going up, and more importantly, if you're enjoying the work at that point, you're only adding value to the business. So hang on until you get to the point where you think, okay, I'm about to get burnt out. I'm about to start seeing a decline because I'm not going to put more time into it. Yeah. That's the time to sell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any specifics you could share on what you told them to do?
I'd have to look back. I don't remember actually.
I know. I mean, because obviously the homework that he did that you told him kind of reinvigorated him and started growing the business.
Yeah.
So.
He had shut down a few product lines that were just more cumbersome to fulfill and orders to fulfill. So he started paring back on some of his inventory, shutting down a few of his product lines, and I told him that he should probably add those back in. And then I think there was a workload issue on that, and so I'd have to go back. If there was a workload issue, I would have recommended that he hire somebody part-time to help with that, so that it's more transferable for the next owner. Yeah,
because you become almost like a trusted business advisor in this circumstance, because it benefits both parties.
Yeah, and we want people to think of us that way. I mean, that's why I hire entrepreneurs. Joe, Jason, Darren, Brian, they're all people that work with me. They're all entrepreneurs who have done this before. The way I look at anyone's online business is that selling is such an end of life sort of concern for that business, right? It's a one-time thing. So I don't want you to just go out and do it without being well prepared. Now, you might know that you're ready to sell the business, and if you are, fine. Even if you get a little bit less, if you're ready to move on, fine. Yeah. But I don't want you to sell the business and then later on think, like me, I could have gotten triple for what I sold. And I wish I did. That would have been very helpful.
What percentage of people, Mark, sell with you and then turn around and then buy something from you?
I have no idea.
Is there a large percentage?
We do have it. Yeah.
What about, you talked about some of the horror stories, right? What's been a great story as far as acquisition goes?
Sure. So I'll go with a recent one. I worked with a woman who had a phenomenal business, one of the most organized businesses I've ever seen. She did so many things right that, frankly, it made my job significantly more easy. She had all of her finances in order. She had her processes set up really, really well documented. And she knew her business inside and out. There just weren't any loose ends. She didn't want to list it publicly, so I approached 10 buyers with it. I found a buyer who was also phenomenal to work with. I actually did a case study on her on our blog on how to transfer a business because she just did it so well. I want to do a case study with the buyer because he did so many things right. Well, one of the things that he did right, which I'll tell anyone that's looking at buying, he understood that he was buying something that somebody had poured a lot of energy into. And so he was very respectful of that, to the point where when we did our first conference call after the offer was accepted, he took just one moment to say, I want to thank you for selling me your business. Right? It was such a simple little gesture to say, I want to thank you for selling me your business, but it meant so, so much. And we always think about the numbers, we think about the metrics. Deals and offers are made on that, but they're closed based off the goodwill and the trust between the buyer and the seller.
Yeah.
You have to have that. And so from a buying standpoint, when you're buying, you want to be building that up as much as possible, as much goodwill as you can, so that you can spend it if you need to with a more contentious issue.
What did she do so well in the transfer side of things?
Again, it was just organization. She did a few things that were very original, though. So one of the things she did, passwords is often a difficult thing. You usually get this really long list of passwords that you have to keep a Word document on. What she did is she created an account with LastPass, account with LastPass, and then just transferred over the LastPass account.
I can't live without LastPass.
Neither can I. The other thing that she did, she created a unique Chrome user and gave login and gave him the login for that Chrome user. So when he had LastPass and Chrome combined, he would open it up. He would have 10 tabs that opened up to all of his most important pages. And with LastPass, he'd get logged into all of them automatically. And so it gave him access within
seconds to
minutes. It was brilliant.
What other softwares and tools do you like and use? Like you mentioned LastPass. What are some other ones? Because at this point, you, again, with also having 6 kids, you have to have some kind of system in place or there would be chaos everywhere.
I love to just play around with different software. So I change all the time. Todoist is one of those ones that I fall back on quite a bit. I love Todoist. Slack, I've been using that with Quiet Light Brokerage. I like, what's the name of the Lucid Charts for diagramming out things. I
I've
use
not
that.
seen that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's been helpful for me just to diagram out ideas, flowchart ideas as well. I mean, I wouldn't be able to live without Google Apps.
Right. What about on the e-commerce front? What have you seen that's popular software products that people are using?
Shopify. I mean, hands down. It's the majority of people want to buy on Shopify and use Shopify. BigCommerce would be up there as well as far as being popular. But Shopify is hands down the runway leader for popularity.
So that lady was a success story. What's another one?
Sure. I had a guy, I'll go back a few years. I like the success story because he had a good reason for selling. He did a good job with a dropship company, actually. Here I was disparaging them, but he did a good job with a dropship company. He was selling basketball hoops and other sports equipment like that to both gyms and also homes. Basketball hoops is not something that you can really carry in inventory very easily, so it made sense to dropship.
You have like 100 in your bedroom. Yeah, they don't fit.
Right. Be lots of fun for the kids, but so what he did is he created a really cool. He was on. I think it was on Yahoo shopping cart. So this was a few years ago. He created a really nice shopping like engine. You could put in, here's what I'm looking for, and it would narrow down your product list from like 3,000 down to 30. It was a nice little distinguishing factor for his business. What I liked about his story, again, well organized. He knew his business well. His financials were well prepared. His reason for selling was solid. He was starting a new business where he needed access to capital. He had already raised a lot of money for this new business. His was the last portion that needed to go in. And so he knew his number. He knew what he needed to get out of it. We were able to bring it to market, find a buyer, wrap it up fairly quickly, and he was able to move on to his new venture. And that was a fairly short and quick, painless process.
What are some crazy reasons you've heard for people selling?
Crazy reasons for people selling. I wouldn't call it crazy. I've had a lot of sad situations. Divorces, I think probably the hardest one that I've run into was a guy who had bought a business. He was planning to run it for about 7-8 years and then sell it and retire, but he had come down with a terminal illness and wanted to spend time with his wife. So what I often explain at conferences is the most overasked question from buyers is, why are you selling? And the most frequently dishonest answer is, why are you selling? We usually don't know why someone is selling, and we'll ask it anyways, but we really don't know why.
Yeah.
But for most people, and I'd be of the same viewpoint, for most people, it doesn't make sense to sell, and it shouldn't make sense to sell. I don't think financially it makes sense to sell if you have a good business. So why would you then sell? It has to be some sort of change of life or change of scenery sort of situation that's dramatic enough where you're going to make what is essentially not as financially of a good decision. Because you're going to, best case scenario, let's say that you have a great, phenomenal business, and that's e-commerce. 3.5 to 4 would be the top that we've seen from that. And you have to be growing pretty rapidly at that point. It doesn't make sense. If you're going to be growing rapidly, you're going to make more than that over the course of 3, 4, 5 years. It's got to be some sort of major situation. So divorces and separations, partnership disputes, those are kind of the sad situations.
You see people, all different life circumstances come into play.
Yeah. I wish I had a crazier story. When I was working for Alabanza, I lost a sale because my client was abducted by aliens, or supposed. That would actually qualify for a crazier story than this, but it's a totally different business.
How did you communicate with him?
Well, actually, I read about it in a paper because he was well known. He had raised something like $45 million.
Whoa.
And then
the paper said he was abducted by aliens.
But the paper was like, what happened? I forget his name even now, but it was like, what happened to this guy? Because he was known in Silicon Valley, and he had gone off the deep end and was claiming that he was abducted by aliens. So
that is weird.
Yes, yeah.
So, Mark, I want to talk about valuation for a second. I figured we could talk about one of the, it is a case study because you have, obviously, people can go on your site and they can go on Quiet Light Brokerage and they can go to listings. They can see whatever is listed there. And so I pulled up a few e-commerce ones. So I figured instead of just talking, like you said, it just depends on valuation. And I know you can't disclose specific numbers and things because there's non-disclosures, but there's an e-commerce business here on the site. Maybe it's not going to be there much longer. Someone's going to buy it, but 10-hour weekly workload. And the description is, as launched in late 2014, this 95% Amazon jewelry fitness brand is operated in less than 10 hours per week. It's grown over 340% in the last 12 months. All these things sound like, a seller is just, or a buyer is lighting up inside with those with that sentence. So talk about how maybe just in general how it's come to the valuation. It looks like the multiple is 2.13. Like, how do you come to the multiple and the valuation of some business like this?
Sure. So coming up with a valuation is always a bit of a mix of what is the market willing to bear, and then also what are the owner's requirements or expectations or goals. As I just said, it doesn't always make sense financially for somebody to sell. So you have to ask, well, what are your other goals in selling? Quick sale or...
Right, 10 hours a week, it's growing 340%. Like,
right.
Why sell it?
Right. And I don't know specifically what the reason is for this person selling. I'm actually looking to see if I can find it real quick. So they're saying time constraints with other activities that they have.
Do they have 7 kids or something? Or... No, I'm just kidding.
Possibly, who knows? There is something in there about a baby, so possibly. But as far as coming up with a valuation for a business like this, it will be a mixture of that. Now, 2.13 multiple means that there's going to be something that we are also looking at and probably saying there's some things that a buyer needs to account for with this business. Maybe it's defensibility of the product line. Maybe there's something else that we're seeing. Maybe it's just young, which is very much the case. And I think that's actually the case with this one, if I'm not mistaken, that it's just...
Because if it was older and maybe more unique, then it would warrant like a 3 times or a bigger multiple.
Yep, and I'm looking at this one right here, launched late in 2014. So that's definitely going to be a discount. We recommend people wait at least 3 years before selling. There's a discount under 3 years. And even if you're like at 36 months, you're not going to get the best multiple you can possibly get. So anyways, for valuations, it's going to be a mixture of both what's the market going to bear, and then also what are your expectations. If this owner is really just, hey, I got to get rid of this business. I love it, but I just can't do it, and I want to sell it before it kills me and then I lose all value, then we're going to recommend a lower price. It always has to be within what we think for market expectations, reasonably within or close to market expectations in order for us to sell it. So I won't be putting up a 10 times multiple or anything like that unless it really justified, but I can't imagine that.
What type of businesses have the biggest multiples?
SaaS tends to have the biggest multiples
SaaS.
at this point in time. SaaS content sites, recurring subscription revenue tends to have the highest multiples.
So for something like this, you figure out, I mean, obviously the nuances about why they're selling and all the background, but then you, obviously the hard numbers, you have the income, which in this case, in the revenue, which is 411,000, the income is 126, and then it's a multiple off of the income of 2.13 times for this particular business.
That's right. And so I've got a love-hate relationship with multiples, more of a hate relationship than a love relationship with them. They're very static statistic, which I have troubles with all the time. I would just encourage people, don't get hung up on the multiples. They don't tell you much at all. They just tell you what the last 12 months were. They tell you nothing about the direction of that. Of what that income is. And no businesses, well, I won't say no business. Most businesses don't stay flat from year after year. They're growing or they're shrinking. And you don't get that idea from the multiple alone. But yeah, for this one, we always do base it off the last 12 months, but a lot goes into that multiple itself.
So for this particular business, whatever you can share, what would you say someone can do? What are the potential areas? Like, so a buyer is looking at it like, okay, it's a 2.13. Obviously, they want to recoup their money as fast as possible. Where do you see the potential areas for a buyer for this business? Yeah,
for this business, it's so young that it's still in its initial growth curve. So with a business like this, there isn't actually a lot to do initially to be able to recoup your money faster, especially at the low multiple that it's at. You have to support it, and you have to, as a buyer, do your upfront research to make sure that it's going to continue growing and not tank after you buy it. And obviously, we wouldn't sell it if we think it's going to do that, but buyers need to do that research independently to see if they agree with us on that. Other than that, just looking at this, they've added a lot of SKUs within just the past few months, and those are just starting to hit. And with young companies like this, oftentimes, especially e-commerce, that's what it comes down to, is starting to build up that inventory and that product offering, and it naturally will grow the business on its own.
Mm-hmm. Anything else that a untrained eye wouldn't see, like a trained eye like yourself sees with this type of listing?
If I knew it better, I could probably give better advice, but I don't know this listing terribly well.
It just says he's identified and opened many paths to growth that require minimal working capital. So it does say the reasons for the sale are time constraints with a full-time job and a 9-month-old baby. So this person's operating this with a full-time job, it seems.
Right. And I think for a lot of people, they don't want to leave the security of that full-time job. They start these things, especially with Amazon businesses. This happens a lot, where you start something on the side thinking it's going to be side income. And if you do well on Amazon, and I'm sure people that are going to Prosper Show are familiar with this, sometimes the growth from Amazon is aggressive to the point of being almost difficult to keep up with. It happens to a lot of people. Yeah. Well, I think the majority of e-commerce sellers on Amazon started with an e-commerce business, and they thought, I'm going to add Amazon as a side channel. Right. Next thing you know, Amazon is their main channel of revenue.
Yeah. So. And then what about, there's another one, the nutritional supplement business, worldwide growth structure in place. This is a 3-year-old nutritional supplement business, has a worldwide network in place ready for substantial growth. It started in 2013. This company had amazing results until a partnership went bad. Without any direction or attention, there has been a serious drop in sales. This one says revenue at 156, and then the income was 107, and it has a lower multiple of 1.85.
Right, and that would be because of the decline. Declines are obviously a major drawback on any business. We always recommend people try and course correct if they can, but if they can't, if it's not within their capacity either mentally or otherwise, maybe they need some outside resources, then you sell, and you sell quickly before you get out ahead of your valuation, because it tanks very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. So that would be the main driver for a low multiple on this.
I would imagine one of the most frequent questions you get, maybe not, you could tell me, is the financing piece
Yes.
from a buyer. How is that usually handled? Someone does have a briefcase full of $200,000 cash, like laying under their bed or something.
Sure. Well, I mean, we do actually have a number of cash buyers. Cash is obviously the preferred way to go.
Cash is king. Yeah.
Cash is king always. And if anyone is wondering why, it's much easier to negotiate with somebody who can pay right away than waiting for a bank who you have no control over. SBA financing would be the number 2 source of financing.
Mm-hmm.
About half of our deals are done through SBA financing. And then outside of that, it's usually a mix.
Does a business have to be of a certain age to qualify for that, or how does that work?
It has to be 3 years old, have 3 tax returns on file, and it's got to be U.S. based in order to qualify for SBA.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, it's not terribly difficult to qualify for SBA. And you actually get better multiples. For a seller, your drawback in accepting an SBA loan is that it's kind of a hairy process, which is frustrating, and there's no guarantee that it's going to get approved.
How long does it take typically? I mean, it's probably differs, but I mean, are we talking a year? Are we talking 6 months, 2 years?
So if you talk to an SBA lender, they'll tell you 3 to 4 weeks.
We'll push us through in 4 weeks, and then year later, you're like, what?
3 to 4 months is more typical from our experience. I'm going through one right now. We're on month 6.
Wow.
So
that just you have to wait on that before you close on the deal.
There's nothing you can do about it. Really. I mean, there are some things you can do. You can have some things prepared. You make sure that your tax returns are ready. Make sure that you have your profit and loss statements ready. If you run multiple businesses through one entity, make sure you have tax returns for everything and they match. Profit and loss statements for everything, and that they match your tax returns. Be organized with SBA, and you can push it through a bit faster. But you're still waiting on other people who are not motivated to get the deal done like you are.
With a cash deal, can people get a discount on that, like on the price typically, or how does that work?
Absolutely. I mean, if I have 2 offers and one's a cash deal, and let's say it's even 10% or 15% less, I'm going to recommend to my client that they take that cash deal. Unless we're really low on price on both of them. But the cash deal is guaranteed. It's clean. It's fast. I mean, you can do a cash deal on a mid-sized 6-figure business. You can do a cash deal in 4 weeks without too much difficulty. So,
what does the SBA require as a down payment typically?
Good question. So SBA will do, depends on the size of the deal. They'll do they'll either finance up to 80% of it. If it's, I forget what the line is. I think it's around $500,000. I can look this up later.
Anything before like 500 or below, they'll do for 20%.
I believe it's 500,000. Yeah,
okay.
Or maybe it's between either 500 or 700,000. I have an article on our site that actually goes over this. But they'll either do 80% or they'll do 75%. So for the larger loans, they'll do up to 75%. From the buyer, they require 10% down. Now that obviously leaves either 10 or 15%.
So he gets free money. What happens to that?
Right, and so that's usually picked up by the seller. It's very unfavorable rates for the seller.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yep. SBA often likes to see the seller carry. It's not required in all situations, though.
So they have some skin in the game type of thing for it to do well?
Yeah, the bank likes to see that. I encourage buyers to be willing to put up the 20-25% because, frankly, the terms that a seller has to take on their portion are terrible. They can't receive any payments on their loans for the first 2 years. Yeah. So if I'm selling a business and I'm carrying,
you want to lock up 10% or 15% of your business, yeah.
Right, and I'm not going to see my first payment until month 25 at best, and then it's on a 6-year amortization schedule. So it's just.
Yeah, you don't recommend it to your sellers.
It's a raw deal. Yeah. And most sellers look at that like, yeah, right, I'm not going to get that money. So if you're able to do the 20-25% down or keep that seller note down, you just have way more negotiating power. And you're still getting paid back within the first year on your own personal down payment. So
what are the interest rates now on the SBA loan?
They're going up. The last rate that I saw was 6.45. So they are going up.
What are the reasons they reject people? Besides, I mean, obviously the time, like all those requirements are met. Why do they reject people for that?
It's more on the buyer, more on the buyer side than the seller side. Yeah. If the multiple is too rich, then they'll reject the deal, or they'll only finance up to a portion of the deal. So let's say that you have an offer for 800,000. They might do a valuation and say, well, we only think this is worth 650. It's not terribly common. Their multiples are generally friendlier than what the brokering industry has.
Right.
On the other hand, buyers, if they think a buyer is overextended with loans, the last deal that I had where a buyer got rejected, he got rejected because he had just completed 2 other deals within the last 6 months. And so the
Had a
SBA
lot of
looked at
credit
them,
out.
yeah, they just said you're over leveraged. We feel a little uneasy about how much leverage you have out there right now.
Yeah.
Even though he's a good buyer and has some financial backing outside of that, they still rejected it.
Yeah.
So it's more on the buyer than anything else.
Yeah. So those are probably the typical, right? The SBA loan, the cash. What's some creative financing solutions that you've seen work out for people? Entrepreneurs, they probably get creative, like if maybe SBAs.
Rollover for business. Yeah, rollover for business startups, I think, is one of the more creative ways to finance a purchase. And a rollover for a business startup uses your retirement account. And it's a little bit of a convoluted process, but what you do is you form a C Corp.
Okay.
And then you open up a self-directed IRA, and then that self-directed goes into your C Corp, and now your C Corp can make acquisitions with your retirement funds. There's tons of red tape involved. There are companies out there that specialize in this and can make sure that you pass with flying colors with it. But it's a nice way to tap into your retirement account to be able to acquire a business. The problems with it are that you have to be a C Corp. C Corps are not as tax friendly. And the other problem is that the money has to stay in your retirement account, right? So if you're growing the value of your business, it's growing the value of your retirement account. You're not necessarily going to be able to take that and buy a vacation home without having the early withdrawal penalty.
It's just a creative way that they can finance it through means that they already have, but they can't access right now type of thing. But then they won't be able to access it now anyways when they grow their business.
You can, though. I mean, what you could do is you could do a rollover for business startup. You could acquire the company. You could refund or grow your retirement account to basically refund whatever you use to acquire the company. Yeah. And you could take your self-directed IRA, divest in your own corporation, change out of that to an S Corp. I mean, you can do a number of things like that to use it as a temporary loan. I personally would hesitate to do it because I just don't want to mess with my retirement. But if you have $3, $4, $5 million in retirement, and you want to stake 400,000 or 500,000, it's not that bad of a risk. Yeah. That might be worth it.
When have you seen a case actually of someone seller financing it, or a portion of it?
A portion of it it's
How
not
common
uncommon
is
to
that?
see. Yeah, it's not uncommon at all. I would say.
What does that look like?
I would say the majority of our deals, the majority, over 50%, have some element of seller financing. It's typically limited to anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending on the business itself. Some businesses you will not be able to get seller financing because they're just good, solid businesses, and that seller just won't take it. But you're typically looking at notes of about 2 years at the top end. It's really hard to convince a seller to do seller financing because there's no guarantee on that, right? There's no note that you can really secure it against, or no asset that you can secure it against other than the business, which they're trying to get rid of.
Right. Why would they do it then?
Because they don't have too many other options, right? Or if they get enough money at close where they feel decent about it. What I tell sellers frequently is the money you get at closing is guaranteed. The money you get in your first payment is pretty much guaranteed. Second payment, and so on and so forth, but your percentages go down the further you get out.
Really?
And so just kind of have...
Do people default on it, or what are the reasons?
Honestly, not often. But again, from the seller viewpoint...
You just want your money.
Right. And there's that reality of there's no guarantee. How do I guarantee this? The best guarantee that you can have, I know escrow.com has a domain holding service, so they'll put the domain in escrow. That's actually a pretty decent piece to use, and we use that with a lot of our seller notes to help secure the note. We don't see defaults at a high rate at all, though, surprisingly.
Yeah. Mark, thank you so much for this, by the way. Everyone should check out quietlightbrokerage.com. I feel like I can go through all these listings and have you analyze them all day long. It would be fun. What have we not talked about with Quiet Light Brokerage that you think would be important?
I think the biggest thing I like to let people know through any of these conversations and in conferences and anytime we get to talk to people is that don't wait too long before talking to a broker about a valuation. And I know that sounds like a sales pitch, but I've already said, and I will stand by this all day long. I don't care whether or not somebody sells their business. In fact, I think financially it makes sense to hang on to the business, but leave your options open. You and I actually already talked about this earlier. The things that we do see as far as why people are selling are life-changing situations. They are things that
you just never know.
You just never know. Yeah. And you don't want me to look at your business and say you should wait 2 years if that doesn't really suit your plans. Doing a valuation now, having us just take a look at the business allows you to identify how much it's worth now, what it could be in the future, and maybe some things that you should be looking at and planning for in the future. Frankly, most of the advice that we give is good business advice anyways for just day-to-day business advice. And we love having those conversations. So my biggest advice to people is have a sense for this. Just have it in the back of your mind. We understand that you're running your business to grow it. Great. Keep that up. And just have this in the back of your mind so that your options are open if you need it.
So Mark, where should people go on your site? I guess they just go to quietlightbrokerage.com, and then the upper right-hand corner, it's a free evaluation.
It's a free valuation. We're actually going to add a paid valuation.
That's generous. I mean, it takes time and energy on your part to do those things.
Well, we've had people that actually say they don't want a valuation because they don't want to use our time. So we're actually going to be adding a paid valuation here soon. It's not going to be all that much different from what we give away for free, though. So really do feel free to fill out the form. When we reach out to you, let us know that I'm not interested in selling right now. That's fine.
They don't want to do it because they don't want to waste your time, and They don't want to do it till they're serious, so they don't do it. But then probably right now they should do it just to get a sense of where they're at or something like that.
Right. They end up wasting their time down the road eventually by not knowing the mechanics of what makes their business valuable early on. So,
any other posts that we should point people towards? Because I know you have a lot of informational posts on your site that I've read that are very helpful. Any ones in particular for the e-commerce folks to check out on your site?
Sure. If you go to the resources section on our website, there's a couple of really good articles. One of the things that we talk about, I know it's not exciting, but knowing the difference between accrual and cash basis accounting. If you're going to Prosper Show, I'm going to use this as an example in my presentation of how we've saw, I think the valuation swing was over $200,000 based off accounting methodology alone.
That's crazy.
It is. And it's one of those simple things that you can do to make sure that you're getting the most value out of your site. So take a look at that article. It's a very short article that explains the difference. And then Joe Valley wrote a pretty nice comprehensive guide on how to sell an Amazon business. So take a look at that. And then take a look at the blog where we're constantly adding new stuff on the blog that's very on point.
The resources, and you can see the accrual versus cash accounting. And then you said Joe wrote one on selling an Amazon business. That would be helpful for people for sure from Prosper Show.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mark, thank you for taking time away from the 6 kids, your business, everything else. I want to be the first one to thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me on. Thanks for giving me a break from my 6 kids. This has been fun.
Thanks, Mark.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100 grand.